In the late 70s, 6 couples and 3 children took part in a unique experiment. They chose to spend 13 months living in the Iron Age. Forsaking all the trappings of the modern era, they lived, worked, slept and ate as their ancestors would have done 2,300 years ago.
Can I have one person hold each leg?
Yeah. Very much weight, does it?
Where do you reckon to stick it?
Just a second.
The series, brainchild of television producer John Percival, was the first ever reality TV programme. But it wasn't built on conflict and artificial pressure. No one was voted out, though some did choose to leave, and the cameras only visited for 2 days a week.
That's when you can tell us it's now.
30 years on, What Happened Next revisits members of the group to find out how the experience shaped their lives and what became of the people who chose to live a year in the Iron Age.
I don't take the view that I should live a primitive life because I am an Iron Age man. I'm just 2,000 years later.
Living in the past was an experiment in reconstructing an ancient way of life. For one entire year, a group of 12 young people and 3 small children first built, then lived and worked on a replica of an ancient British farm, cut off from the modern world. They didn't attempt to become ancient Britons, that was obviously impossible. But for the whole of that year they wore, or didn't wear, the same kind of clothes, lived in the same kind of buildings, raised the same crops and livestock, and used the same tools which archaeologists and historians tell us were used more than 2,000 years ago, in the Iron Age.
From the moment I first heard about the project, when Sarah presented me with a newspaper article which had some details of it, I knew instantly that that was what I really wanted to do. I hadn't crystallised it in terms of an Iron Age project, but I knew I wanted to live in a primitive way, and that was this absolutely identified with what it was I wanted to do.
The settlement, about an acre in extent, was laid out in a woodland clearing on the high chalk downland of North Dorset. Here, in early spring, the volunteers had to set out to build their own home. For the first few weeks they wore modern clothes and used simple modern tools, but the materials they used and the plans to which they worked were authentic enough. The site plan was based on archaeological excavations of real Iron Age settlements, one of them only a mile or 2 away. The positions of the buildings are indicated by dots representing the post holes where the main supports were dug into the ground. These formed the only blueprint for a whole array of buildings clustered around the big roundhouse, which was to be the focal point of the village, and the place where all 12 volunteers would have to live. But for the moment, they had to put up with tents, modern camping equipment, and imported supplies. They had to build their prison before they could live in it.
We went with an expectation that it would be hard, an expectation that we might not succeed, that I thought that I might become ill or injured and it might be quite serious, but I was willing to do that and try and see this project through and stick to the rules we were given.
Everyone was given a crash course in Iron Age techniques before they started.
Well, that isn't going to quite make it.
The rafters of the roundhouse had to be carried on a ring beam supported by an inner circle of tall oak posts. This kind of carpentry isn't an exact science. Each piece of timber has to be individually tailored to fit.
Hang on. Let's put it flatways. I prefer looking flatways.
Move back. Just onto the thing. Put it down, Peter. Okay. Drop it down and rest there. No, don't push it, because you'll push over the structure. Yeah.
As work on the roof went ahead, they began to prepare for the next stage of the building of the roundhouse, the daubing of the walls.
We mix the daub from one part clay and one part soil.
Yeah.
The worst part of it really is getting the lumps out of the clay. Once the clay is even, you mix in enough soil to make it sticky, and then you mix in quite a lot of either pig bristle or some sort of animal hair and straw. It stays very easily on the walls if you mix it right, so that it's fairly sticky.
The group tried a number of different thatching systems until they found the one which seemed most effective.
With the old system, you put on a bundle individually and tied it as a bundle to the previous one. With this system, you have two people laying on the thatch. The thatchers that came told us that you had a dressing layer first, which stops any drips coming through, or hopefully, if it...
Building the roof was of the roundhouse took an incredible long amount of time. I don't like heights, so I couldn't do the work from inside because we'd lay on the straw and then it had to be sewn, so you needed a team working on the roof on the outside laying the straw down and then a team stitching from inside. But when we were about 2/3 of the way up, I did notably actually fall off, which meant that I slid down like a huge slide, zoom, onto the ground.
The wettest spring of the century didn't help, and delay followed delay as they struggled to finish all the buildings in the teeth of the cold and wet.
It's very hard to find the motivation sometimes, I find, to really work flat out all day when you feel the starting date's getting further away. I think the real motivation that I'm looking for is having to be self-sufficient, having to produce all my own food and things like this. And at the moment I feel, we're piddling around, not getting started.
The first time of the project, before we actually got into living in the house ourselves, was sheer hell. It was very cold, it was very wet, it was extremely hard work, and it was quite hard to keep the morale up. Several of us at that point in time questioned whether we were going to see it through.
If anyone was going to give up, now, if ever, was the time to do it.
Sleeping on frozen ground, I actually had chilblains on my thighs, which I've never experienced before or since, luckily. It was very uncomfortable. We were wearing our ordinary clothes, but without the 20th century washing facilities, and it was actually very, very difficult.